We are pleased to have with us today Tammy Kelley. She is someone that I've known for a very long time. We have many mutual friends and a great mutual respect and admiration for each other. She is going to speak today on the significance of worship flags. She has a ministry called Flags in Motion. So Tammy, would you go ahead and share your message for today, please?
Well, thank you, Mary, for having me on as your guest. And I'm just so honored to get to share with you my journey of what the Lord has placed in my lap in regards to worship flags. And, when we look at the Bible and we look, for that word worship flags, we're not going to see that in the scripture. So I think that's why there's a lot of like controversy in regards to whether or not, these worship flags, when you see somebody in a corporate time of worship waving, these flags and thinking that maybe they're just a distraction. But when we actually look in the scripture, we see the word banner, standard, ensign. So these are all words that even they're just interchangeable for that word flag. So I kind of always like to, preface that in regards to if we're going to go to the scripture and we're going to look for worship flags, we're not going to see that. But when
Right.
we're studying the word and when we're trying to learn whether something is biblical or not, or how we apply something to our life, sometimes we have to, look at the significance and the symbolism of things. And so, one of the things that the Lord has been teaching me in how I educate and share with what I do and what I do believe is important, um, is that when we think about so first of all, the scripture says that the Lord is our banner and his
Mhm.
banner over us is love. And so through his love, that's where we get our strength and that's where we get our victory.
Can I,
And so
may
that,
I just
go ahead.
May I just interject one thing? I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but this is just something that it, I think part of the issue that has probably been associated with the flags is the fact that this is sort of a new concept, and many denominations in the past have not embraced this or done it at all. And it's a fairly new part of corporate worship, from what I can tell. Would you agree with that?
Yes, well, from my understanding, which, my time in the church, I wasn't raised in the church, so, I can't say, like since my childhood. Um, but my time in the church, I had never seen worship flags. Um, and so I think some denominations, shy away from it.
Mhm.
Um, and, I do believe that with anything within our church, within the corporate time of worship, teaching, we definitely need to have some sort of order. We don't need to just have people showing up and doing whatever they want to do.
Right.
In the same sense that, when we have a worship team, we have a leader that leads that team.
Right.
Uh, they put practice in and time in, and they understand, they kind of vet to see spiritually where, those team members are. So, there's a process of order and leadership that comes with when we come together in a corporate setting. And so I think some of the issues that have happened with worship flags is that you have had individuals just show up to a church with these flags and they pull them out and they just start waving them and they kind of take over the time of worship, and they don't have any respect or honor for the space, other people in their time of worship. And so I do believe that there is a place and a purpose for worship flags as long as there is some sort of leadership and order, to help navigate that within the corporate time.
Mhm.
And so, when we also think about what are the significance? Why are we even waving these banners and stuff like that? Like, what does that even mean? What is its purpose? I began to think about the scripture that tells us that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the powers and principalities of darkness. And so what that tells me is that there is a battle. And so when I began to then think about the scriptures that address and educate us on, the battles that were fought and won, we see that it was the worshipers and the flag bearers that went ahead of the regiment. They went ahead of the army to kind of like prepare the battlefield. And so then when you look at that standard bearer on a battlefield, what was their role? What was their purpose? And what was significant about them? And so to begin with, a standard bearer had to be they had to be somebody of high character, of high moral. They had to have like such bravery because they stepped onto the battlefield with no weapons. They just had these different flags, and what these flags represented was they represented to identify who they were as an army. They used to boost the morale of their regiment. They were used as the forms of communication, that once the battle began, the army would get so spread out that they couldn't hear the commands from the general or the commander. And so sometimes there were trumpets being used to sound, to make a sound, but sometimes those couldn't even be heard. And so it would be that standard bearer that would bring out a certain flag to communicate. And, when we really kind of do some research to think about, as an army, when they're on a battlefield, what you don't want to do is to have communication that gets disrupted in regards to, a regiment of a certain group where they're retreating when they should be advancing. So that was the standard bearer's role, was to communicate when to stand still on the battlefield, when to advance, but it was never to retreat. And one of the other things that we see that was significant in battle was that the opposing side of the battle, they would always try to take that spirit or that standard bearer down, because if they could take that standard bearer down, they could interrupt the communication. And so it's kind of like the capture of the flag, that was part of that. And so, when we're looking at the scriptures to see the significance, what we're seeing in the natural as a standard bearer, then we go back to that scripture in Ephesians where it says that the battle isn't against flesh and bone, that it's against the powers of principalities, that it's the forces of evil in that heavenly realm. And so we know that that's a spiritual place. So as a spiritual standard bearer, when we are waving those banners, we are, number one, communicating a message. We are identifying who we belong to, that the Lord is our banner, and that his banner over us is love, and that we have the strength and the victory, in his name. And so when I am worshiping, sometimes I will know what that worship song is. And so I can coordinate according to the worship flags that I have, whether it's a certain color, whether there's a certain image, and I can bring that worship flag out, and I began to move it and worship with it in unison to the instrumental sound, through the vocal of the singing of the songs, what those lyrics are stating. So when we're, making those declarations, when we're in a time of worship, those banners can be symbolizing and being, communicating a message. And so even sometimes in worship, I've been guilty of it where sometimes I just kind of go into go into church a little tired
Mhm.
and not as focused, and I can get distracted, and maybe I'm watching something else and I'm not really paying attention, or I'm not like staying in tune during this time of worship. Um, and so that's one of the things that spiritual standard bearer can do, is by the waving of those flags, it can kind of regroup and bring the attention back to worship, so that we're staying in line, um, with our time of worship. So we're not wasting this opportunity to engage, uh, with our Father during this time. So those are different, significance of the worship flags.
That is very insightful. I'll be the first to admit I was not aware of pretty much any of this information. I'm very thankful that you're sharing it, because I have a feeling that if I wasn't aware of it, that there's probably some of our followers and listeners that are not either. And it's very eye-opening, and I appreciate you sharing this information.
Yeah. Well, and just, being transparent, the first time, I saw, flags being waved, I was annoyed by it. I was distracted by it. And, you know, um, but through my personal testimony, um, the Lord is just, like he teaches us through kind of like our words, so sometimes when we say things like, we're praying for things like, Lord, give me patience. Well, you better be careful about you asking,
I quit
you know,
asking for that a long time ago. I learned. You
yeah,
don't mess with
because he may not always give it to you in the way that you're anticipating it, but yet it's beautiful because he's teaching us his ways.
right.
And that's ultimately, what we want to do, is we want to represent him. And so when the Lord began to, impart, um, a freedom of worship in me, and teach me about like having a heart relationship with him and expressing what's going on in my heart during the time of worship, um, my body began to move. I began to visually see things like in the spirit of like what it might look like in heaven when, the angels are worshiping, when we will be worshiping at the throne room. Like what is that going to look like? I mean, if we think about a celebration,
Mhm.
and we think about even in our own physical realm, when we celebrate something like a wedding or a birthday, I mean, we go pretty all out with all of the streamers and things that we do to decorate. I mean, even when we do these like birth announcements of like gender reveals, I see a lot of it like they do these like little smoke bombs where, it just creates all this stuff in the atmosphere. And we're celebrating, and you see all of that pink smoke going up because we're celebrating that baby girl, or you see that blue smoke going up because we're celebrating. So it's the same thing. Colors mean something. And in heaven, I'm sure there's a lot more colors in heaven than what we even experience here on the earth. But there's this celebration of us coming to the throne room. And so there's times that the Lord has given me like a spiritual vision of being able to see something, um, just to maybe even imagine what it even looks like. And I know the scripture even, teaches us that heaven is going to be even bigger than our imagination. So if there's anything that we can even think of, it's going to be grander. It's going to be even a bigger celebration. So I even think, like, Lord, if I even imagine that the celebration is going to look like this, it's going to be even grander. So I don't want to put any limitations, uh, in how to celebrate. and how to worship. And so it's been really interesting in this journey. And so, one of the things that I'll share too with you, I've got some notes here, so when we're looking at the significance and what flags symbolize, what they indicate when we're worshiping and when we're waving these banners, through scripture, we see that they symbolize the presence of the Lord. And that's, through Psalm 20, verse 5. And it says that we will rejoice in thy salvation, and in the name of our God, we will set up a banner. So that is already stating that, in his presence, we are going to set up a banner. And so as it symbolizes the ownership, in Numbers 2, verse 2, it says, the people of Israel will camp each by its own standard with the banners of their father's house, and they shall camp facing the tent of meetings on every side. So every tribe had their own banner that identified who they were. And then just symbolizing the association. So Moses built an altar and he called it, the Lord is our banner. And that's in Exodus 17, verse 15. And then just the relationship. And this is kind of one of my kind of favorite scriptures in regards to when I teach and I share, and I'll share a little bit on this. But in relationship, it says, "Oh, my love, you are as beautiful as Tisra, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners." And that's in Song of Songs, and that's chapter 6, verse 4. And so when we look at that scripture, when Solomon is describing his bride, and this is about the preparing for his marriage, and so their relationship had all these ups and downs, and so he's having to speak to his bride about how he sees her, and he's describing her as these beautiful cities, and then he references that she is as awesome as an army marching with banners. And so when we think about Christ's return and that he is looking for a bride, and so we parallel this scripture with how does Christ see us as, as his bride. We definitely have ups and downs with our relationship with the Lord. But as he is coming and preparing this wedding banquet for us, and we look at this scripture then and think about, is he seeing us as this beautiful city? Does he see us as this amazing army marching, on a battlefield, waving our banners? And so then we look at that physical battlefield. Going back to what did that standard bearer represent? And, so when I'm in worship and I'm waving my banners, then, I believe that number one, I am identifying who I belong to. And then I began to just worship and listen for the command of what I want to communicate. Just like that standard bearer, he had to stand close to the general on the battlefield, that commander, to hear the command and then to release that form of communication. So when I am in a time of worship, I am listening to the Lord. What does he want to communicate? And so I will have different banners to select from, and then I will begin to wave and to come into unity with the time of worship. And sometimes I even use my own words where I, begin to make declarations out of the scripture. and I use my own voice. Um, or I just go into unity with the song that is being sung. And sometimes I am communicating this relationship of love, of intimacy, uh, forgiveness, victory, or sometimes it's even to a point of like, Lord, I'm stepping on this battlefield and we're going to war. We're going to communicate to the enemy that he no longer has this power over us. And we are going to war and we are going to break these chains of, cancer, or
Mhm.
uh, issues of marriage or finances or calling the prodigals home. So sometimes when we're in a time of worship, we're all battling for something different or we're celebrating something different. So our worship flags, we want to be able to, as a spiritual standard bearer, we want to be in communication with what heaven is speaking and release that. Or
Yes.
what is our heart speaking and how
Mhm.
we want to communicate to the Lord, to the heavenly, to the spirit realm. So there's kind of just, a difference of, is God communicating through these flags? Are we communicating through these flags? And it can be one of uh one of each of those, or it can be both of those at the same time, depending on what that person in worship is needing to hear. So if they have ears to hear, then they will be open to hear, what God is communicating, or vice versa, what their heart is feeling and how they want to communicate as well.
That is really good. That's very insightful. So,
Yeah.
um,
And so with just sharing all of this, just kind of recapping, what is significant about worship flags and what are the expressions of worship flags during corporate worship. So what I'll share here from my notes is that banners declare who we represent. They rally the troops, so they rally us as the worshipers. They herald an event. So if there's something very specific that we're warring for, they can herald that event. Uh, they unify the company directing the warfare and the praise. They show victory. And of course, we know that our victory is in Jesus. And then they put the enemy to flight. They signal and attract attention. They make a proclamation. And even part of worship, they become like a garment of our praise. Um, and then they bestow honor, and then they just celebrate the Lord. And so I hope by me sharing, some of this information and just kind of a little bit of a glimpse of what the Lord has given me in regards to the significance of worship flags and being a spiritual standard bearer. I hope it opens up people maybe to a new understanding and maybe, see these differently now if they encounter these, in a church service or at some worship event or some meeting place, that maybe now they will see them in a different light.
I think that is valid and without doubt, it's truth. And I know I have benefited from it. I have a better understanding now because before I did not. And so I know I'm not the only one. So I thank you very much for sharing this. It's been insightful, helpful, and I appreciate it very much. And I think
Yes.
our listeners will also.
And if
So
anybody would like to visit my website, they can go to
yes,
flagsinmotion.org. And then I also have a Facebook page. So it's just Flags in Motion. And I share a lot of just the teachings of what God has been teaching me through the word about the different meanings of color. Also just sharing, things about movement, worship, and then just sharing, some of the designs and, the different things that I do in the creative side of, me personally creating and designing the worship flags.
We will include that information as well. And also, probably share just a clip from your video where you actually are doing a worship flag.
Demonstrate. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so with that clip, that is from a time of worship at the state capitol here in Nashville, Tennessee. And again, it's just being on the grounds, being boots on the ground, setting the atmosphere over our state capitol, making a declaration that we as Tennessee, that the banner over us is the Lord, and just declaring, that we want to be in place as watchmen. And so we're just making that declaration and just waving, different banners to just set that atmosphere over our state.
That's great. Well, I thank you very much. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll have you back on again before long.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.